it's almost the end of what's been a really busy year with my reading. I managed to get through 62 books, but let's talk about the top 10 picks. So out of all the books I read this year, it was a pretty hard job to narrow the list down to just 10, but here we go. I'll get straight into it. So coming in at number 10, we have Tom Clancy's Chain of Command, co-written or written by Mark Cameron. Now this is the latest instalment in the Jack Ryan Jr. series, which I've been following for the past 3 years when I started reading the original Jack Ryan Senior books. So this one was really important in terms of how the series is going to continue. Now I won't go too much into that because I'm going to save that insight for a video that's being uploaded this weekend, which I have hinted at in previous videos, called Why You Should Read Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan books, and that'll go into a bit more depth. But this one I couldn't really put it down. It took me about 2 to 3 days to read, and I've become quite attached to a lot of the characters, in particular Jack Ryan Jr. and his dad, and there's some really good moments in this book and some real WTF moments. So it's a worthy entry into my top 10. And coming in at number 9, we have Later by Stephen King. This was written under his hard case crime label, and you might remember that Joyland was written under the same label, and so was The Colorado Kid. Now, it was a short read. I remember whipping through it really quickly. It had some really good supernatural elements to it. It had several Easter eggs, which are really fun to hunt for when you see references to Stephen King's universe. I always love that about a Stephen King book. And another worthy entry into my top 10. Now, coming in at number 8, we have Saint Death by Mark Dawson. Now, he's the writer of the successful John Milton series about an ex-British Secret Service assassin who tries to redeem himself by becoming a figure like the Equalizer, trying to right his wrongs, trying to gain redemption through doing good deeds for people and that sort of thing. He's an alcoholic. He's haunted by all the deaths he's caused. I mean, they were bad people and that sort of thing, but it tended to take its toll on him. So his alcoholism is a constant struggle, and I just find his character very endearing because he does try and atone for his sins at the same time as running from his former employer, who don't take it too kindly to having one of their operatives just up and leave. It doesn't work that way when you're in that sort of position. Coming in at number 7, we have Needful Things. This was a reread for me, and I did a video examining the book and its movie adaptation as well in a previous video, which was done a couple of weeks ago. So if you haven't seen that already, take a look. Just gives you a bit more insight. But for my second reread through, I enjoyed it a lot. But the one thing I did discover is the ending wasn't quite as strong as other books. But it's just a great read. There's a cast of heaps of characters, and his characterization in this book is just second to none. The quality of the writing is amazing, and it's in one of my top 5 Stephen King books of all time. So there's very good reason for that. And it's a very underrated book, and more people should read it. Coming in at number 6, we have Empire of the Vampire by Jay Christoph. He's an Australian author, and I love to support my local authors. Now, I haven't got a picture up on the screen on this one because I thought it pretty fitting to show off the copy I managed to get in October. Now, I've got it right here with me. And you've probably seen with your research online, if you've been interested in the book and you've been hearing about the book and people recommending it to you, you've probably seen quite a few different versions that are out there now. I know I've seen the American version, which is pretty nice, but I've got our UK Australian version here, and I managed to get a special order in from my local Dimmick store, and they got in for me the blood red edition, so it's actually got red foiling. And not only that, I was lucky enough to get hold of a copy that was signed by the author as well. So pretty sweet. And the read was great. I haven't read a lot of vampire fiction before. I used to read a little bit of Anne Rice. I dabbled briefly in Brian Lumley and that sort of thing, and Salem's Lot by Stephen King. But overall, I'm pretty ignorant to the vampire genre. What I found awesome about this is its originality. How cool is it that you can refine blood down to a fine powder and it becomes a narcotic for people like the main character? And not only that, having your body tattooed in silver, and you can hold your hand up with the 7-pointed star and kill vampires with it. It's just amazing. And the humanity that's demonstrated by the character and the villains in it, it's just got so much scope, and I believe it's going to be an epic series because it is planned as a trilogy, I believe. And Jay Kristoff is hard at work on the second instalment now, so I would be looking forward to the second instalment the minute it comes out. Coming in at number 5 is The President's Daughter by James Patterson. This is a really good read. It wasn't a short book, but it read very quickly nonetheless. So the basic premise is the president's daughter gets kidnapped and the president himself goes after her. So I think that's pretty cool. Obviously he loves his daughter enough to go after her and get her back. And the thing about James Patterson books that has defined them is the quick chapters in most of the books he writes. It's designed to be read quickly. If you read a 2 or 3 page chapter, you want to keep reading on because each chapter isn't very time consuming and the narrative pace keeps going full tilt, and a lot of the chapters end on a cliffhanger, so you cannot help but keep turning the pages. And I remember reading through that one quickly as well, and it was just really thrilling. It was a nail biter, and could not wait to get to the end. So another worthy entry into my top 10. Coming in at number 4, we have Dead House Gates by Stephen Erickson. This is book 2 of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, which I got hooked on earlier this year thanks to Mike over at Mike's Book Reviews. He has done quite a few videos on it promoting it, and even though they're confusing as hell at times, I really enjoyed this one. I ripped through it in about a week, I think, and even though it's confusing as hell, it's still enjoyable. Some of the character arcs were brilliant. Some of the payoff scenarios were great. Now, what I've come to terms with and what I've taken away from this series is it's designed to be reread. It's meant to be confusing, and things are meant to make sense later in the series. But Stephen Erickson isn't silly. He's actually made it complex, so it makes you go back and reread sections and things like that. And I have no doubt once I finish the series, I will go back and reread it. So the series does its job that way. Coming in at number 3, this was a really, really powerful book for me, An Evil Mind by Chris Carter. It follows the cases of Robert Hunter, one of the top LAPD detectives. Now, Rob Hunter is a really interesting character to me. He could do any number of things with his life. He was a child prodigy. He went to college years earlier than his peers, and he excelled at everything. And he chose, of all things, to be an LAPD detective. He could have been an astrophysicist. He could have got a Nobel Prize in chemistry. He could have gone on to be a psychologist. His knowledge is just unbelievable, and he applies that knowledge to the cases he works. Now, this was unbelievable to me because it's several books into the series, and you see Robert Hunter as a really strong character, and nothing really phases him. But in this book, one of his old friends is the antagonist, in this novel, who he's the only person that Rob Hunter has come across to really get under his skin. And Robert Hunter normally doesn't let anyone get under his skin, and this was different. This really piqued my curiosity, and the events that happen in the book, I don't know how Rob Hunter didn't have a nervous breakdown. I've never known such a villain in a book like this. It just kept me up really late at night to finish it, and what makes this a worthy number 3 entry out my top 10 is how long the events of the book stay with you and affect you and resonate with you long after it. Now, I finished that book, I believe it would have been as far back as April, and I just remember, even up until now, it still resonates with me, and for such a powerful book, deserves a number 3 spot in my top 10. And if you haven't read Chris Carter, he's got about 8 books that he has written, and every one of those books are great, but out of the entire series, An Evil Mind is a standout. Coming in at number 2, we have Magician by Raymond E. Feist. Now, Raymond E. Feist has so much respect among the fantasy-loving community. All the fans love his books, and no one really told me much about Raymond E. Feist. I didn't have any recommendations on the internet or anything like that. I knew of him for a few years, and early this year I just happened to be looking in my local department store and came across a copy of it on the shelf, and I thought, well, this looks interesting. I was in between books at the time, and I just felt I really needed to delve into some fantasy, and certainly wasn't disappointed with my pick. Pug is a very endearing character. The magic system is amazing. It's so well written. The edition I got was the 2-in-1, so it had the 2 volumes that make up the Magician book, and 700 pages, and I enjoyed every word of it, and it really got me hooked into reading a lot more fantasy this year. So before this year, I hadn't read a lot of fantasy. I'd mainly read crime and horror and that sort of thing. My reading was quite linear. So that is a very worthy number 2 entry, and it's resonated with me as well, and it's made me want to read the other 2 books. Now, I did read Silverthorn, the follow-up, and I'd like to finish A Darkness at Sethanon, the 3rd volume, before the end of the year. So after I finish reading what I'm currently reading, which I'll go into in a moment, I'll be giving that a go. And coming in at number 1 is Matthew Riley's Impossible Labyrinth. Now, this is number 1 for a number of reasons, and there's a lot of factors that have to go into me selecting a number 1 book. It has to have me wanting the book months and months before it's released and chopping at the bit, and as soon as it came up on my radar, I kept an eye on anything I could find about it, cover reveals and an excerpt from it from Matt Riley that he posts on Facebook and that sort of thing. It's a series that's been running. The Jack West Jr. series has been running for 15 years, and I've been a fan of Matthew Riley since 1997 when Contest, his first standalone novel, got released. And the Jack West Jr. series is just fantastic. It's got archaeology, it's got riddles, it's got wonders of the ancient world, it's got exotic locations, it's got non-stop action. It's just purely epic in scope, and the Jack West Jr. character is so endearing, and it has so many layers, and the team he works with, Sky Monster and all the other people are just fantastic. And this book kept me up until I think about 12:30 or 1 o'clock in the morning. Read it in 2 sittings. The day it came out, I went and got it, and unfortunately that was a work day, so I had to go through my work day before I could get to start it. So a book like this gets a number 1 spot because when I'm not reading it, you're thinking about it, you've been looking forward to it for a long time, it's kept you up late, it's got characters you love. It's a little bit sad because it is the finish of the series, but it's also exciting because Matthew Riley's now free to go on and explore other things. Just a bit of trivia, he has been back in Australia. He lives in LA at the moment, but this year he was in Australia filming his new movie called Interceptor for Netflix, which is going to be an action flick. You've probably heard about it, and I'm not sure when it's going to be on Netflix. I think it's about April or May next year. So he's directed his first movie, something he's always wanted to do, and good on him. And again, Australian author, I like to support my local authors, and I just can't wait to see what Matt Riley brings out next. So that is my top 10 which all worthy entries. And as I said, it was really hard to narrow down the list, but I'm really happy with the list I came up with out of 62 books. Some didn't make the cut, and I'd read quite a few good books, but those were the standouts. Now, as to what I'm reading at the moment, I'll just add that in. I've been reading this one for about 2.5 weeks. I'm almost finished. I haven't been reading as much lately. I think I've burnt myself out a little bit. So I'm just ploughing through that, and hopefully I will finish it this weekend. Then I will finish by having something lighter to read, and I think besides Darkness at Sethanon that I mentioned before, I might also squeeze in Summer Night by Jim Butcher, which is the 4th book in the Harry Dresden Files series, which I've been having a blast with. The last book, Grave Peril, what Harry went through in that book was absolutely brutal, and I don't know how he came out of it actually. And you think, well, that's only book 3, and there's 12 or 13 more books in the series. How can Jim Butcher top that? I'm keen to find out when I pick up Summer Night. So that will close out my year, and yeah, that's it for today, and I'll catch you next time. See ya.